series has been such a light in dark times, so rewarding to show so many of you, our members and supporters, what sometimes I'm the only one at Olana who gets to see, interfacing with the wider field of American art, seeing how Olana holds a special place in the hearts of so many people, as it does in the heart of Sarah Cash, as you'll hear later tonight. So we're going to try to keep this momentum going, continuing to share this place as a real beating heart of new ideas and inspiration with art at the intersection with the natural world. So a little more of that tonight and more to come in weeks ahead. I'm delighted to introduce one of my friends and colleagues in the field of American art, somebody I really admire, Sarah Cash, who is Associate Curator of American and British Paintings at the National Gallery of Art, and somebody who has had a unique journey with Frederic Church, as you'll hear tonight. She has many different interests, many different contributions in the field. I know that she's working on a very exciting upcoming exhibition that we'll have to be staying tuned for on John Singer Sargent's deep commitment and connection to Spain. And that will be opening in the fall of 2022. So she's working hard on that these days. But her long journey has taken her many other places at other times. She's done great work on Thomas Eakins. She started her career at the Amon Carter Museum in Fort Worth, Texas, with that wonderful collection. She was later director of the Meyer Museum of Art at what is now Randolph College. And then for an important period, she was Beckhofer Curator of American Art at the Corcoran Gallery of Art. The institution that owned Frederic Church's Great Niagara of 1857 until it merged into the National Gallery. So as you can see, Sarah Cash has been traveling with that iconic painting. She's come to know it like few others. And I happen to know that she has a dream of one day doing a larger project on Frederic Church's Niagara's plural, more than just that one masterpiece. So she's been very kind to share a little of that thinking, that work in progress, some little candid glimpses behind the scenes at what a curator at such a wonderful institution is thinking about and working on, these discoveries she's made, including a number of things from the Olana collection that even I hadn't seen until earlier today. So this should be really eye-opening. And if you want to turn on your camera there, Sarah, we can reveal you to others and introduce you and get this show on the road. So we will switch over into the screen sharing function. There we are. Good to see you, Sarah.
Thank you. Good to see everyone. And I'm going to, good evening. I'm going to share my screen. I'm going to try to. And I hope I have been successful in that. Let's see. Time will tell. Okay. Hello again, everyone. And thank you, Sean and Will and Margot. I'm delighted to be with you all this evening. And before I begin, I would like to acknowledge several people who've provided generous assistance to me in recent years. Olana's Michelle Phillips, Valerie Ballant, Ida Breyer, Rana Dixon, Julia Rosenbaum, as well as Caitlin Condell at the Cooper Hewitt Museum. This evening, I'll share with you some of the many things I've learned over the nearly 22 years that I've been what we might call a curatorial steward of Frederic Church's 1857 masterpiece, Niagara. First, as Will said, as curator at the Corcoran Gallery of Art for 16 years, and now at the National Gallery of Art, where I have been for about 6 years. Much of what I'll be sharing is research in progress for a possible exhibition and or publication about Church's many images of Niagara Falls. I like the way Will said many Niagaras, or Niagaras plural, because that's certainly the case. Of course, Niagara is known to most of its viewers literally as an icon, a masterpiece, which of course it is, but there's so much more to its story than the dazzling painting that meets the eye. There's the artist's creative process, including some newly discovered aspects of that process, as well as what happened after the painting's completion. What effect did it have on Church's career and on American art and culture in the second half of the 19th century? And there are many works to tell that story. We know of some 80 plus works by Church on the subject of Niagara, including 2 exhibition scale paintings, very large paintings, our Niagara being one of them, 1 missing large scale painting, more about which in a little bit, a tantalizing story to be sure, a number of preparatory works for those 3 large scale paintings, including many related works, reproductive prints, and ephemera. Niagara's tremendous success, both in the US and abroad, of course, established Church's reputation as the most famous American painter of his time. I hardly need to tell my audience that this evening. His majestic 1857 canvas reveals the vista from the Canadian shore, based on oil and pencil sketches, as you'll see, that he'd made during several visits to the site in 1856. And I happen to love maps and photographs so that I can get oriented to what I'm seeing in paintings. And I hope these 2 images help you. In Niagara, our painting, we are looking at the Horseshoe Falls here. I hope you can see my cursor, which are in this map from 1882, which are here. And we're seeing just a little bit of Goat Island here in our painting. So hope this gives you, and these are the American Falls, of course, which we are not seeing in the National Gallery's painting. And likewise, this incredible panoramic photograph, you can get the sense of the Horseshoe Falls and the bit of Goat Island that Church depicted in his painting. Of course, I want to point out also Church's really important role in preserving Niagara Falls, leading to the preservation of Niagara Falls as the country's first state park. As you all know, I'm sure, Frederic Law Olmsted credited the artist with first bringing to his attention the need to protect and preserve the Great Cataract. In the 19th century, many artists, not just Frederic Church, of course, attempted to capture the power and beauty of Niagara Falls. Widely considered the nation's greatest natural wonder, as well as a symbol of the country's youthful vigor and promise, the site was also deemed far superior to any natural phenomenon in Europe. Church was not the first, as I said, to render the falls. I'm showing you a view by Alvin Fisher from 1820. Complete with steppage figures in the foreground, as you see in a non-socially distanced picnic. So Alvin Fisher and many, many others painted the falls before Church. However, Church was the first to render this spectacle on such a grand scale, with such fine detail, naturalism, and immediacy. It's interesting to me, I think, and to many, how Church changed the falls to suit his needs. He eliminated most signs of tourism. That is, we don't see really any buildings, maybe just 1 or 2 tiny buildings on the horizon at the right. And there are no steppage figures. In fact, and the canvas itself has a really unusual format. It is twice as wide as it is high. To emphasize the panorama and the expanse of the falls. But perhaps most interesting to me, one of the many interesting things, is the way Church pushed the plane of the falls nearest the viewer, nearest us, significantly downward to reveal more of the far side, as well as the dramatic rush of water. And I'm showing you on the right a photo by Frank Kelly that Frank took in about 1984, which demonstrates this really beautifully. I mean, if you look at the photograph, you get the sense of more of a table of the falls, where if you look at Church's painting, you can really sense that he's tilting the back part of the falls up, in a sense, to create this incredible sensation that we are suspended over the falls. He also, of course, eliminated any suggestion of a foreground, allowing us to experience the scene, as I mentioned, as if precariously positioned on the brink of the falls. As one writer enthusiastically noted upon the painting's first public exhibition in 1857, quote, "This is Niagara with the roar left out," end quote, which I kind of love because it addresses it gives you the idea that the painting is addressing all of our senses except our hearing, our oral sense, A-U-R-A-L. So, which in fact, I truly believe that it does. We were talking just before the webinar began about Olana and how Church really believed in engaging all of the senses at Olana. And I think that is true here as well, again, with the exception of actually hearing the roar. Of course, you all are probably familiar with the fact that Church altered landscapes and altered views to suit his needs. I don't have to tell you about how he altered the landscape at Olana so that he could have this spectacular view down to the Hudson. Well, if you think of Niagara in somewhat the same way as Church altering his the view to achieve his goals, we can see a parallel there. So what inspired Niagara? What inspired Church to make this picture? This is the first of a few sections that I tried to use to organize my comments this evening. And I will say that Niagara, the thoughts of Niagara actually in Church's head probably date back to when he was in South America a few years before the painting was painted. In 1853, he spent 6 months traveling there in South America. And of course, as you know, from Eleanor Harvey's talk a few weeks ago, that Church sought out tropical subjects on the advice of Alexander von Humboldt, who believed that South America's great biological and geological diversity provided the ultimate stimulation. Church was very interested in von Humboldt's idea that the objective scientific study of nature could not be separated from our sensory experience of nature. I'm sure that you know that. And of course, one of the paintings that was produced on this seminal first trip to South America for Church was Tamaka Palms, the great early painting in the National Gallery's collection, formerly in the Corcoran collection, and actually originally in the personal collection of William Wilson Corcoran, the founder of the Corcoran Gallery. And I'm showing you, of course, an image of von Humboldt on the right. Following von Humboldt's route, Church visited also the falls of Tequendama in New Granada, now Colombia. He was amazed, as he wrote to his mother, that the river suddenly breaks through a gap in the mountains and falls in one unbroken sheet into a terrific chasm, 670 feet, and then descends into a series of waterfalls and cascades. Well, we're viewing up at the waterfall, as you can see, and in the foreground, the water is rushing toward us. And the painting, as a number of people have written about, definitely illustrates the many different aspects of water and how we can experience it, its destructive force, as well as its generative power. Well, the critics who saw this painting, one critic in particular who saw this painting now in Cincinnati on public exhibition, wrote that Frederic Church should not paint the falls because he cannot. So I'd like to think that this painting actually was sort of throwing, or the critic was throwing down the gauntlet to Church, and that Church was even more determined to paint a waterfall, a better waterfall than that critic thought that he had painted in Colombia. So I think that may have been the impetus for going to Niagara Falls in 1856. And let's look at a few sketches and paintings that Church actually made on those first visits to Niagara Falls in 1856, which were several different times. He worked there in the spring and the fall and all different kinds of weather and light. And here I'm just showing you a few of the oil and pencil sketches that Church made on the site in 1856. These were densely hung on the wall of Church's studio, the oil sketches in particular, as a way to market the painting of Niagara, the studio painting that he was working on. Absolutely spectacularly beautiful sketches that I have seen at the Cooper Hewitt. And I love the idea that in the pencil sketches, Church, which don't show to their greatest advantage in this PowerPoint, I'm sorry, but I can tell you, with all the careful notes I made at the Cooper Hewitt, Church has annotated the drawings with really fabulous phrases and colors. The one at the bottom right, he has annotated with the date, the word moonlight, and he's written that the sky should be luminous and the clouds warm, and he's written about the rainbow and the colors that should be in it. So, and he often had a key, as you can see at the upper right, with numbers to what he wanted to do in the painting, and the numbers appear throughout the pencil sketch. Number 6 appears in the sky. He wants it to be dark purple gray. Number 3, just above the horizon, silvery golden blue. He's very poetic in his annotations of these fabulous drawings. I can tell you to try and come up with this match, so to speak, this drawing from, or sketch from the Cooper Hewitt, beautiful with those touches of gouache on it. And the painting at the right, and now in the Wadsworth Athenaeum, it was, I had a number of days where I sat at my dining room table and took photocopies of all of these works and moved them around like big puzzle pieces, trying to figure out what works related to which other works. I think I'm at a good place now, but there's definitely more work to be done to figure out sequences and relationships. I'm sure you'll recognize the painting at the right of Horseshoe Falls, excuse me, allergies, and Table Rock. And I love its relationship to the drawing at the left, now at the Cooper Hewitt. So there are these kind of fantastic sequences that I've discovered in working on this research. As I mentioned, the different light, different weather conditions, this kind of moody, dark, wonderful image from the Cooper Hewitt is just one example of Church's experimentation with light. In my research over the last couple of years, which I should say is ongoing, but it's now a little bit on hiatus because I'm working on this major John Singer Sargent exhibition, I was fortunate enough to spend quite a bit of time with works in Olana's collection, primarily at People's Island. And I'm so grateful to the staff of Olana for helping me back when I was doing this. And I, because of the great cataloging at Olana, I discovered that there were a number of photographs that belonged to Church. And I'm still working out what might be the relationship, if any, between Church's collection of photographs depicting Niagara Falls and his preparatory sketches and his working methods for creating the large paintings of the falls. And you'll have to excuse these photographs. These are my very own iPhone photos of these stereographs. I may have said daguerreotypes, but again, it's interesting that he is collecting these and he's seeing Niagara. I love the ones of in the middle of Niagara in the moonlight, Niagara Falls in the moonlight. So so much more research and study to be done with these photographs to understand them and how they fit into his process. Also, there are several daguerreotypes that were owned by Church that are in Olana's collection that I have had the privilege of studying, and I still am studying them and thinking about them, and what they meant to Church. Did he know the photographer, Platt Babbitt, who was, as I understand it, my research has told me, was certainly the most popular and successful photographer at Niagara Falls right around the time that Church was working there. I don't confess to know everything about my subject. That's why I said earlier, this is a work in progress. So I'm still hunting for clues about what if any relationship the two men had, friendship. How did Church acquire these daguerreotypes, which are quite beautiful? And for fun, I had to put this in because this is from our own collection at the National Gallery. This is just like the most entertaining, jumbly stereoscope, because stereoscopic photograph, because you see, actually, we're looking at Babbitt's studio and shop here. You can see all of these signs, Babbitt's stereoscopic views of Niagara Falls. And then we've got these interesting, stuffed animals, and there's a swan, and you don't know where to look in this photograph, but I was delighted to find out that we had this in our collection at the National Gallery, and Platt Babbitt is a photographer on whom some work has been done, but it seems more work needs to be done. So what did these preparatory sketches done in 1856, how did they feed into the making of Niagara, the actual production process? Of course, we know that Church took sketches like the ones that I just showed you, and like the pencil drawing at the pencil sketch at the lower right, back to his studio in New York City, put them all together, probably a lot in the same way I did on my dining room table, moving them around, pinning them up on the wall, trying to figure out what would make the best composition. What size should the painting be? What should it look like? And this sketch at the lower right with a double rainbow, I love, because you can obviously make out the rainbow, and we're looking roughly, very roughly, at the same vista in the National Gallery painting, and we're seeing this jumble of mist, pencil lines suggesting the mist coming up from the falls. Here's another sketch showing the Canadian Falls and Goat Island, again, roughly the same view that we're looking at in the painting, inscribed with two words. On the rock in the right foreground is the word salmon, I'm assuming salmon color, and the word bright appears at the right. Some of these sketches, he happily, for me, the art historian, Church put a month and a year. He put October 1856 on this one. Some, he didn't put any date at all, which is very frustrating. And actually, the sketch, I realized when I was putting together this webinar, the sketch from the Cooper Hewitt at the right demonstrates just precisely what I was talking about earlier, how we are looking in Church's pencil sketch and in Frank's photograph at the falls the way you actually see them, that is more of a table, a flat table, as opposed to having this tilting up that Church did in the final composition. So clearly, Church loved the idea of the panorama, and he moved from the smaller sketches that we just saw, some of which we just saw, to larger, more panoramic sketches. And the one at the top here from the Cooper Hewitt's collection is actually in 3 pieces put together, using pencil and gouache. So we're able to see then the Horseshoe Falls at the right, moving all the way around to Goat Island and Terrapin Tower, and then the American Falls over here. Clearly intrigued by this ability to make a panorama, he then went on to make this beautiful oil sketch of Niagara in the collection of Teresa Heinz at the bottom, relating very closely to the pencil sketch that you see at the top. And here, it's like that panoramic photo that I showed at the beginning. You're able almost to see everything. It's quite remarkable. Or the way you make a panoramic photo right now with your iPhone. Horseshoe Falls in the collection of Olana in this beautiful frame, which I understand is its original frame, if my notes are correct. It was actually in 2 pieces. You can see the seam down the center of the work. But again, this work is what, this composition was what Church finally came to. This oil sketch is the closest composition to the National Gallery's painting. Church has moved away from the super panoramic view here to the one really just of Horseshoe Falls and a bit of Goat Island. So what was the life of Niagara after Church completed it, after the paint was dry? I think it's interesting to think about what the life of a painting is. What does that mean? Because painting, as a curator, I often think that I'm not don't think I'm crazy, but paintings do have lives. I mean, they travel around, they are seen by different people, they have really, really interesting histories. So one way that that we could begin thinking about the life of Niagara is what happened to it right after it was painted. Well, the painting was sold immediately to a dealer in New York called William Stevens and Williams in 1857, and was shown by that dealer immediately as a single picture exhibition at their gallery in May of 1857. I mean, literally, the paint must have still been wet, for an admission fee of 25 cents, which included the pamphlet that I'm showing you on the screen, reprinting, of course, reprinting critics' praise of the canvas, advance praise for Niagara Falls, which is a 19th century phenomenon I just love. You know, gather all of this criticism and put it in a booklet and sell it so that everybody kind of reads the same thing and thinks the same thing. And in the back of this brochure, again from Olana's collection, there is an order form that you can see over at the right for a chromolithograph, a reproductive chromolithograph after the painting. The exhibition, this first exhibition, the first exhibition of a large painting, a great so-called great picture, single picture exhibition, attracted over 100,000 viewers in just a few weeks' time and inspired an unprecedented outpouring of critical and popular praise. What one newspaper critic described as, quote, the finest oil picture ever painted on this side of the Atlantic, end quote. The painting made Church's name a household word virtually overnight, as you know. Following this phenomenalist success in New York from 1857 to 1861, the painting was shown in 17 exhibitions in the United States and Great Britain. That's 4 years, 17 exhibitions. The registrars at Olana and the National Gallery would be going crazy. The painting was also included in the 1867 Exposition Universelle in Paris, and really was the first, as I mentioned, the first great picture of the golden age, the golden era of American landscape painting. This brochure is just a treasure and so interesting to look at. And I love the framing of the pages and the framing on the broadside, the little order form for the chromo. Well, there's also a spectacular object, another spectacular object in Olana's collection, which is this order book. And these are my iPhone photos, so they might be a little fuzzy, but you see it is the order book for orders for chromolithographs after Niagara, after the Great Fall, Niagara. As you can see the title, this is the first page of the book here, and there are many, 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 many pages of the book where someone has inscribed the names of everyone who wants to order a chromo. The very first name, which you probably can't make out, but I can and I know, is Millard Fillmore. And anyone ordered a chromo after the painting when they saw the exhibition at William Stevens and Williams. So we have American artists like Sanford Gifford, we have collectors, we have dealers. It really reads like a who's who of the American art world, plus Millard Fillmore in 1857. So this is the order book for over 1,183 chromolithographs after the painting. So, and on the inside cover of the book is pasted this broadside that you see at the left in patriotic red, white, and blue, advertising the painting's return for exhibition at William Stevens and Williams the following year, fall of 1858, as well as the sale of the chromolithograph. It mentions an issue of 10,000 copies of the chromo. So it's truly a treasure, and I love the red, white, and blue chromolithograph. The chromolithographs came in two sizes, large and small, commissioned by William Stevens and Williams upon their purchase of the painting from Church. And this is an example this one in particular in the British Museum of a chromo that could have been ordered from that big order book. Other impressions are in other locations of this, this is a steel engraving in Olana's collection from 1875, and there are other impressions in other collections, of course. This one was commissioned by Knoedler in 1875, so there are a number of prints out there. You should keep your eyes open. I tried to collect some for the Corcoran when I was curator there. The Niagara was actually included in the Metropolitan Fair exhibition, about which you heard quite a bit last week from my colleague and friend Betsy Kornhauser. And I love this leather-bound book of photographs by Matthew Brady. I know that Betsy showed you several of those photos. And here is Niagara, actually in a shadow box frame at the time. And as Will Coleman and I were discussing earlier today, putting together the remarks for this webinar was a great opportunity for me to revisit this material, but also for me to think about research questions. Like when I was watching Betsy's lecture, Betsy Kornhauser's lecture to you all of last week, I noticed the painting up here to the left of Washington crossing the Delaware, and I thought, wow, that looks a lot like Terrapin Tower, and it must be a view of Niagara Falls, but it can't be by Frederic Church because I think I know about all of those. And sure enough, through the course of today and some research, thanks to Will, quite a bit of help and correspondence, discovered that that painting of Niagara Falls of Terrapin Tower is actually by René Gignoux, and is, I believe, a painting that's now in the Art Museum in Havana, Cuba. So a contemporary of Church. So these are the kind of interesting rabbit holes we go down as curators when we research these projects. William Stevenson Williams, first owner of the painting, eventually forfeited ownership to Brown Brothers bankers in 1861. I won't go into the details, but in 1861, John Taylor Johnston, first president of the Met, about whom you also heard from Betsy Kornhauser, became the proud owner of Niagara. And I'm showing him in a portrait now in the Met's collection at the right. So John Taylor Johnston, really important figure when it comes to collecting and the history of museums, particularly the Met, owned the paintings, owned the painting until 1876, when he decided to sell it. So the backstory here is also, I think, quite interesting vis-a-vis Church and actually Humboldt, as you see again on the right, and the history of the Corcoran. Because in 1876, just before the Corcoran, before John Taylor Johnston decided to sell Niagara, a few months earlier, in 1876, the Corcoran Gallery of Art attempted to add another painting by Church to its collection to complement Tamaka Palms that I showed you a few moments ago. So given William Wilson Corcoran's own friendship with and fondness for Alexander von Humboldt, the collector, William Wilson Corcoran no doubt played an influential role when in April 1876, the Corcoran trustees planned to buy Church's homage to the naturalist, Heart of the Andes. The Corcoran trustees agreed to bid as much as $8,000 at the William T. Blodgett sale, and the painting sold for $10,000. Always disappointing when a museum can't make a purchase at auction. And that $10,000 was the highest price paid to date for work by a living American artist. So I'm sure that everyone at the Corcoran, including Mr. Corcoran, were very disappointed at not being able to buy Heart of the Andes. There are some days when I wonder what would have happened, would the Corcoran have survived if it actually owned Heart of the Andes? But I try not to go down that road. Just 8 months later, after this sale of Heart of the Andes, the trustees of the Corcoran, having failed, I'm sure they thought, in purchasing Heart of the Andes, they decided to redouble their efforts to resolve to purchase another painting by Frederic Church, Niagara, from the John Taylor Johnston collection. This is where we come back to Johnston. The curator at the Corcoran at the time, whose name was William McLeod, urged the, quote, expediency of getting Niagara at any expense within our reach, end quote. The bid was successful at $12,600. This was music to any curator's ears. The board then said to the curator, bid as much as it takes to get that painting. So sure enough, that is how Niagara entered the Corcoran's collection. And because we're talking about the Corcoran and the life of the painting, I'm just showing you a beautiful, beautiful Matthew Brady photograph of the founder of the Corcoran, William Wilson Corcoran, as well as interior and exterior images of the first building of the Corcoran Gallery of Art, which many of you may recognize if you've been to Washington. It's now the Renwick Gallery. Just as the exhibition of Niagara made Church's name a household one overnight, the acquisition of Niagara by the young Corcoran Gallery of Art in 1876 secured the institution's reputation and inspired other major artists to seek representation in the collection. Notable example of that is here. Albert Bierstadt and Frederic Church, lifelong rivals, as you may know. Albert Bierstadt was one of the many artists who, as soon as they read in the newspaper that Niagara had been purchased by the Corcoran Gallery of Art in 1876, I think the letters just flooded in, artists offering their paintings for sale, because clearly this guy, Mr. Corcoran, had some money, and his gallery, his museum, could make some major purchases. So Albert Bierstadt actually sent this painting on the right to Washington very, very soon after the purchase of Niagara. And I have already revealed part of the story because I put a caption on this painting. Bierstadt sent the painting to Washington, calling it Mount Corcoran, whereas the year before the painting was painted, the year before, right after the painting was painted, Albert Bierstadt showed the painting on the right in New York City under the title Mountain Lake. So he unabashedly was appealing to the vanity of William Wilson Corcoran by sending this painting to Washington, called Mount Corcoran, and virtually begging the Corcoran Gallery of Art to purchase it, which of course they did because Mr. Corcoran wrote the checks. So just one example of the influence of Niagara on the Corcoran. The Corcoran Gallery of Art also, like Olana, had remarkable archives, which are now at the George Washington University libraries. And I'll just walk you through these briefly because, again, the images are not too clear, but it's an incredible resource. These particular letterpress books contain copies of outgoing letters from the Corcoran. And these photos show letters to Frederic Church about Niagara. On the right, there is a letter from 1888 from the curator at the Corcoran, to Church regarding the treatment of Niagara, stating that the painting appeared, quote, worse than before Mr. Oliver, a New York City picture cleaner, recommended by Church, began his treatment. In other words, thanks, but no thanks, Frederic Church. Your conservator did not do a very good job. There are also letterpress books from 1890 that include a letter from Church to the Corcoran's second curator about Church's inspection of Niagara at the Corcoran. He came to check out the painting at the museum and look at its condition. Barberin, mind you, was the curator. His subsequent treatment, quote unquote, which was carried out at Church's request, is also recorded. So talk about multitasking. Curators in the late 19th century were also conservators. I'm sure conservators would shrink at this thought just now. Niagara had an amazing life in the first building of the Corcoran, and this photograph records one of the many instances. It's quite a remarkable photo that I think virtually demands more research and interpretation. This delegation of Jicarilla Apache Indians visiting the Corcoran. We know the precise date. We know the people who accompanied them. And seeing Niagara at the right is quite quite remarkable. A fuzzy photograph, I think, from a newspaper showing students, probably Corcoran Gallery of Art art students with their sketchbooks, Corcoran School of Art, excuse me, students with their sketchbooks in the 1890s looking at Niagara. I love the salon hang in this photograph. The Corcoran Archives, now at GW, also maintains daily journals kept by the Corcoran's first curator, William MacLeod, who was also a landscape painter, I should add. I should also add that he became curator at the Corcoran after being working in the US Treasury. So interesting what qualified you to be a curator, a museum curator in the late 19th century. Apparently nothing. If you worked at the Treasury and applied for a job as curator at the Corcoran, you got the job. His daily journals are quite remarkable for many reasons. They record the weather, they record who came to the museum, visiting dignitaries. But in this particular sheet that I'm showing you, they record the appearance and impact of a new frame purchased for the painting in 1884. So the frame that you'll see in a few moments is actually, it's not the original frame that you saw in the sanitary fair photograph, but it is a frame that was purchased with the knowledge of Frederic Church. 3 pages of notes about the early restoration history of Niagara, as documented by curator Francis Barberin in 1891. So the resources that we have are quite incredible about this painting. I'm showing you an image of the flag building, so-called flag building, the second and final home of the Corcoran Gallery of Art, which was constructed in 1897. And on the right, an image from my final permanent collection installation at the Corcoran, in which I tried a salon hang for reasons I won't go into right now. And you see Niagara in the corner at the right. So the painting has had a long, rich life. And of course now, well, not now, but until early March, it hung in the American British Paintings Galleries at the National Gallery in fantastic company, Frederic Church, and across from Church's River of Light, which I'm not showing you this afternoon. And in early March, as you well know by now, if you attended Eleanor Harvey's lecture, the painting was taken down from our galleries and transported up the street to the Smithsonian American Art Museum to Eleanor Harvey's exhibition about Alexander von Humboldt in the United States, which I cannot wait to see. And I know that you all will look forward to seeing it as well. So I asked Eleanor just today for this installation shot where you can see Niagara looking very small below the tusks of that mastodon. Another thing that happened, when the painting arrived at the National Gallery is we were able to, in our conservation lab, perform examinations of the painting that we had not previously been able to do with the technology available to us at the Corcoran Gallery of Art. So one thing that happened was in our fabulous conservation lab at the National Gallery, we were able to take a very large X-ray photograph of the painting, which of course you see the stretcher and you see the rainbow, you see the whole composition of the painting, but you can also see the different pigments. And even more interesting, fascinating in fact, is the infrared photograph of Niagara that I was able to see on a very, very large flat screen in our conservation lab, which showed us things that we were never able to see at the Corcoran. The pencil underdrawing that you see everywhere in this painting, from the flat sort of rock in the foreground, going all around the falls, outlining of little trees. There's Terrapin Tower, little structures on the horizon, just incredible things. Window into Church's working process by looking at this infrared photograph. So I'll take the last few minutes that are available to me and just mention a couple of other of the Niagaras, as Will calls them, that I've been looking at and thinking about in relationship to the National Gallery's painting. Under Niagara from 1862 was a very, very large 4 by 6 foot painting that we have not located. We don't know where it is. This is one of the great mysteries of my research. I'm showing you on the screen, however, the study for that missing painting, which is in Olana's collection, as well as the chromolithograph overpainted by Church, also in Olana's collection. So we know exactly what the painting looked like. We know from some newspaper articles exactly how big it was. I think it's 4 feet high by 6 feet wide, huge, studio exhibition size painting. And this is a work that newspaper writers said that Church worked on when he went back to Niagara Falls in 1858 and chartered the Maid of the Mist to take him to the foot of Horseshoe Falls on the Canadian side. As he put it in a letter to a friend, I, quote, induced the proprietor of Maid of the Mist to experiment keeping the boat still for as long as I needed to make a sketch. They said, never been tried before. We tossed in surging foam for 40 minutes. I'm indebted to the research of Gerald Carr and Shannon Victoria at the Metropolitan Museum of Art for bringing some of this information to my attention. So we know that the painting was painted from these newspaper accounts in 1862. It was sent immediately to England to be chromolithographed. And it was then purchased by a collector named Marshall O. Roberts. And it was returned to New York City to be shown at Goupil Gallery in December of 1862, before it went to Roberts' home. And it elicited an enormous amount of critical praise. When it was shown at Goupil in late 1862, and I'll just read a phrase or two from some of this criticism. The art lovers of New York have now, this is from the New York Times, December 1862. The art lovers of New York have now the opportunity of enjoying another aspect of the great water, seized by the same firm hand and fixed forever in all of its combined terror and loveliness upon the obedient canvas. I have rarely read a better sort of 19th century example of 19th century art criticism than that dramatic writing. So we know that Church continued to be interested in the topic of Niagara from working on this next painting. And we, there it is, there's the study for the lost painting next to the painting that Betsy Kornhauser showed you the last week. And I do believe they are closely related, and I'm fascinated to learn more about the painting on the right as it relates to Church's work, his images of Niagara, because it literally came out of the blue, for me anyway, in about 2014 when I walked into New York City Gallery and saw it hanging on the wall. It had never been known before that to Church scholars, including Frank Kelly. Here's a sketch, a beautiful sketch of the Cooper Hewitt with its white gouache. And you see the Maid of the Mist down there, certainly made on September 1858. It's dated, so from that trip where Church went back to work on the large missing painting. Under Niagara, the missing painting belonged, as I mentioned, to Marshall O. Roberts, and there's a very daunting image of him on the left. Here is his home on the right. And a special gallery that he built to the rear to house his art collection. The home was built in 1857, the year that Niagara was painted, at Fifth Avenue and 18th Street. It no longer stands, but Roberts was a businessman. He established the United States Steamship Company and had many steamship transportation routes. So Roberts owned under Niagara. Then he also owned Rainy Season in the Tropics, which I'm sure is familiar to you. He also owned Washington Crossing the Delaware from 1851. And to put a little footnote here, in 1897, the Corcoran trustees tried to acquire this painting from the sale of Roberts' collection. The Corcoran already had two paintings by Leutze. They were outbid, seems to be the story of the Corcoran, by Samuel Putnam Avery, who had assisted with so many Corcoran acquisitions in the 1870s. Avery was bidding for John S. Kennedy, who immediately made the painting a gift to the Metropolitan. There are many days after I learned this when I wondered what it would have been like at the Corcoran had we owned this painting and Heart of the Andes. But alas, they are at the wonderful Met. So Roberts died in about 1880. A lot of his collection was sold in 1897 by his widow in New York City. But we, Under Niagara, did not appear in that sale. Sale catalog was not in that sale. My colleagues and I at the National Gallery, were eventually able to trace Under Niagara from Robert's collection to his widow's collection. She lived in London, as you can see here. When her son died, that is, the original owner's son died in 1932, there was a sale, basically an estate sale of their house. And this is all the results of lots of research and looking and trying to figure out what happened to this missing painting. Here I'm showing you a catalog from the sale in 1932, and at the bottom right you can see where it says F.E. Church, under the Falls of Niagara, gallery work. I think meaning that it's a very large size, the size of a gallery. Well, this is where the trail goes cold, I'm sorry to say. You would have known by now if I'd found the painting. I'm still looking, but I'm proud that we were able to, when we first started looking, we knew where it was in 1880 when Marshall Roberts died, and now we know where it was in 1932, and we've been trying to trace it since 1932 to no avail. And if anyone has any ideas, I'm all ears because I've tried a lot of different things. So I'll close by just mentioning the third very large exhibition scale painting that Church painted of Niagara Falls. This is one that some of you may have seen or familiar with. It's in Edinburgh, the National Galleries of Scotland. Niagara Falls from the American side, a completely different vantage point, an even bigger painting. I think it's 12 by 8 feet. It's absolutely enormous and spectacular. Of course, it's spectacular. But I love the details in this painting and was excited when I was having that dining room table sorting session, which lasted a number of days, to kind of figure out how these works at the Cooper Hewitt that you're seeing at the right, how they relate to the finished painting. So I think I've kind of done some matching up and tried to figure out how Church put these pieces together. Likewise, one thing that is remarkable to me that you can't see too well in reproduction is this viewing point over at the left of the painting here. And there's a man and there's a woman on that viewing balcony. And here's this fabulous study in Olana's collection for this detail of the painting. Likewise, there is a woman standing behind the man, and there she is in this fabulous study at Olana. And here she is again in a little pencil sketch at the Cooper Hewitt. I'm at a loss to explain why there's a woman with Niagara Falls and Terrapin Tower and what appears to be a rooster at the top center, but there you have it. A crouching chicken is how it's cataloged at the Cooper Hewitt, not a rooster. So these are the three major, as I said, gallery size exhibition scale paintings of Niagara Falls that Church did. The one at the bottom left, again, not the actual painting, it's Olana's fabulous, very finished sketch for the painting. And I don't know whether I'll find that painting under Niagara at the bottom left, but I'll keep looking. And that concludes what I had to share with you as a kind of work in progress, some research, and thank you for looking and thank you for listening and thank you for your patience with my technology.
That was wonderful. Thank you so much, Sarah. What a rich journey you've taken us on. Some things we know and love already that you've helped to show in a wholly new light, and then some things that are really surprising and really exciting. Love all these archival discoveries. So if you want to pop off your screen share there, we can get into a discussion, and everyone please feel free to pop questions into the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen there, and we have a little time. I'll try to get to as many as possible. Thanks all of you again for joining us today. If you're not already a member for this member series, please do consider joining us. And I am also told to mention our nifty new text to give feature. You can text Olana to 518-219-0496, and we sure could use your support in these trying times. So I came away with that newly deep in this fascinating body of visual culture. I thought maybe one way to kick off the discussion would be to talk about a big picture question. I wonder if you have any thoughts on this. We know that Niagara was this monumental moment for American art, that it had this huge impact on the public that received it, this huge demand. What we don't hear as much about is the impact it had on Frederic Church. And I'd be very curious to hear what you think about. Obviously, there aren't any easy, tidy answers to that question, but having a monumental success like that in a format like that, a really unusual panoramic format at the very beginning of a rich career, how do you think that impacted the rest of Frederic Church's artistic work?
It's a very good question. I've been obviously very sort of immersed in this particular subject, although of course we have other, and I know about the rest of Church's career. I mean, it's interesting because I was rereading as I was preparing for my remarks this afternoon, that Church, in Jerry Carr's research about the missing under Niagara, how Church said that he wanted to make an even better painting than the 1857 Niagara. So that gave me like a little window, or more of a window, into Church's personality and maybe his artistic personality. Always, I suppose, trying to sort of better what he had done, to improve on what he had done, and to try his hand at the same subject again and again in the case of Niagara. And perhaps that was true for the rest of his career as well. But it's a very, very good question. I mean, I think he was, you probably know maybe more about his personality than I do, Will, but he's obviously was competitive with himself. We know that. He obviously was competitive with people like Bierstadt. But I think it must have been quite the experience. It's a good question. I have to think more about that.
You've given me a good segue there to another question that comes from Sean, who we all saw at the beginning. Sean was really struck by the way you helped us to understand how tackling Niagara in this way was a kind of classic challenge for a painter, and was his tilting of Niagara a kind of rebuttal to those who would say it was unpaintable, that it could never be fully captured? Do you see that core strategy that makes that picture so fundamentally unsettling in a way as a competitive gesture, a way of responding to that specific critical challenge?
I think that he was very, I think you're right, he was very clever, and of course he was clever. And I just saw someone's comment flash up that he was a perfectionist. Obviously he was trying to continually perfect his art and his work, but definitely the tilting up, the extreme sort of stretching like silly putty out horizontally of the scene, how to make it more compelling. Definitely, it seems like he was being so inventive and really pushing himself, and wanting to appeal to a greater audience. I mean, I sense that. I don't know. I'm not a Church scholar by training like Frank Kelly and you will in Hudson River School, but I have this idea that he was pushing himself and he was trying to do new things. And I don't know if that's all part and parcel of this this spirit of entrepreneurship at that point in the 19th century, pushing yourself, being competitive with Church. I feel quite certain it was the gallery or I think it was anyway, William Stevenson Williams, who decided to publish all of this advanced praise for Niagara in the brochure, this kind of like, push it out, be better, be flashier, try and get more money. Was church like that? I'll ask you.
I think that's a fair point. We certainly are steeped in Church as unexpectedly savvy artist businessman at Olana. We see the ways he made that work of landscape art across media work for him. And so there's a consistent thread there. You are too humble to say that you aren't the Hudson River School person, whatever. You are so deep in this material, and you've really helped us to understand it in new ways. Another question comes from someone you know well, our wonderful New York State Parks paper conservator, Michelle Phillips, who wondered if you might speak to something that has also intrigued me in my first year at Olana, seeing how many instances there are in Frederic Church's work in the Olana collection of paint over print, paint over photography. Do you have any comment on why he would apply paint to a chromolithograph or to an engraving?
Yeah, I'd love to talk more with you and Michelle about that. I don't actually know. I know that that paint, I mentioned, I showed the chromo, and because of length of my talk, I took out a couple of other images. There's one of the Cooper Hewitt where Sargent painted over a photo that I had to take out in the interest of time. But yeah, that's a good question. And I don't know of other examples of other artists who did that. I haven't researched it extensively, but they haven't come across my radar. And again, maybe it was that idea of the personal touch on things like the chromo. But as far as photographs go, I don't know. I know Caitlin's out there. Maybe she has an idea.
We can hold her to account next week when she's speaking for us.
That's right. Well. That's right.
They're really challenging hybrid objects. I can't help but think of the 20th and 21st century example of Thomas Kinkade, where if you get the hand of Thomas Kinkade in the mass reproduction giclée, it costs more. And so there is this comfort with commerce that we sometimes don't like to see in our painters. We like them to be often a garret apartment suffering for their work.
Right. But if it was I'm curious about the photo, paint over photo aspect, because that wouldn't have been something, unlike a chromo. I mean, that would have been for his, well, obviously the chromo belonged to him, but it would have been his for his personal study. So why would he have done that anyway? It's
very strange, and they may be a kind of clue towards some of your future projects, some of my future projects, that help us to understand exactly how photography was useful to Frederic Church.
We should talk more about that.
Absolutely. I don't see too many more questions popping up here, so maybe we should let you go after such a wonderful talk. Thank you for your time. Thank you all of you out there for listening in. We hope to see you all at Olana again soon.
Thank you everyone for listening. Thank you.